Hello and welcome to Sexy Sips, where we explore the world of sexual health and intimacy with open minds and honest conversations. We're your hosts. My name is Jordyn and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm T, they, them.
I'm Ashton, they, he.
I'm Dom, he, him.
And today's episode is all about celebrating Trans Day of Visibility. We are diving into what it means to be visible as trans folks, sharing some of our personal experiences, and answering some thought-provoking and maybe a little chaotic questions along the way. So whether you're trans yourself, questioning, or just here to listen and learn, we got you. Grab a drink, get comfy, and let's get into it. So, the first question I have for you all is, what is the greatest thing about being trans?
For me, at least, I think I've just, gained a bigger appreciation for life. Obviously, there's a lot of, being trans isn't necessarily an easy thing, but I'm thankful for the experiences I've had and the people I've met and just appreciating the complexities of being a trans person. I also think I'm more of an empathetic person because I understand, there's stuff that people go through that you might not see.
I think in a similar vein, the kind of community aspect, or rather the community that I've built through being trans and through meeting other trans people, I also think there's a lot of interesting stuff about transness and a different understanding of the limitations of or the permanence of the body and kind of reframing that through art and stuff.
I feel so much more alive since I came out and since I transitioned. I remember everything felt gray and dead before, and now every little bit of the world seems like just an endless source of joy.
Ironically enough, I want to say, my life is like a video game, and you know how when you have all the customizable skins, how, before you unlock them, they're all grayed out? For me, I want to say when I came out, I, unlocked all of those skins. So, I felt like my fashion options, increased. Well, they literally increased twofold. But I went from wearing, jeans and hoodies all the time to wearing, off-shoulders. And I just felt so much more comfortable in, style and stuff. And I felt like I had that fluidity to kind of experiment with what I wanted to wear, which I thought was pretty cool. So the next question I have is, if you could instantly have any gender-affirming change, no cost, no weight, what would it be?
Bottom surgery. The cost and weight sucks.
I know. I think I'm going to say the same exact thing, bottom surgery. But is the recovery time also non-existent?
Oh, that's
because
true.
I feel like that would change my answer, because I feel like the recovery for bottom surgery especially is so daunting.
Yeah.
I don't want to go through all that. It's what, you have to consistently stretch for, is it a year? Something like that?
Depends on the surgeon, I think.
True.
And, which method you get.
Right. Yeah, but it's, super rigorous, and I don't think that I could handle that. That's what I'm worried about.
I feel like for me, it's kind of a tie between a hysterectomy and body masculinization surgery. I'm more likely to get a hysterectomy eventually just because that's something I'm interested in for not trans-related medical reasons. Body masculinization surgery, there's just so few surgeons that do it. And so when you do find someone who's experienced and has good results, it's simply wait a year and a half for a consultation and then an indeterminate, even longer period of time for actual surgery. And it's so inaccessible. And insurance is my insurance doesn't cover it, and I doubt any insurance I get in the future would.
At the moment, I think I'm chill. If there's anything, I know that there's height surgeries that can give you a couple inches. If there was a surgery where I could be 6'3", that would be great. But right now, I think just getting through college first.
Awesome. So the next question I have is, what is your favorite trans meme or inside joke? And I actually am very passionate about this question, so I will give my answer first. Trans girls and pickles. And I think for me, it's so true. It is so unequivocally true because I love pickles, only dill pickles, because they satisfy the salt cravings, and it's so, so good. I have a tier list and everything. I rank the pickles that I try, and I love it. For those of you interested, Trader Joe's and Van Holten's are currently S tier.
I feel like trans femme meme culture is at the very least more visible, but I almost also want to say more developed than trans masc meme culture. I feel like trans men are often too busy just fighting with each other on the internet to actually have a good time. It's very confusing.
Can I share one meme that I don't like?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't like the whole trans guys are all gross rats and musty, and I'm no, you can be a trans guy, please shower.
Yeah.
I did think of a meme I liked. I like the new bottom surgery dropped.
Oh, yes,
Oh.
yes.
Awesome. So the next question I have is myths about being trans that you have heard.
I'm currently writing my thesis about anti-trans masculinity, and so I am perpetually running into a lot of really random myths, particularly coming from people who are like spreading a lot of paranoia about like the oncoming detransition wave that they've been warning about for the past 10 years. They're like, this year it's gonna happen, and then it doesn't. But there's a lot of stuff about like the age at which someone must recognize that they're trans and like tell people, and how visible it is for like a child with dysphoria to be dysphoric. I also think there's a lot of myths in terms of like what goes into transition, be that like what does it mean to socially transition but not medically transition? What does it actually mean to medically transition? Is there an endpoint to transition? There's just a lot of general confusion and honestly, in some cases, just like deliberate ignorance.
All of the stuff about like you must get a hysterectomy or you'll get cancer and die. And like all of just that like fear about like, no, this will kill you. And just like, no, it won't. Yeah. You'll be fine.
Shout out to Abigail Schreier for spreading some of the weirdest medical disinfo I've ever seen. She's like, if you skip a testosterone shot, you're just going to like get endometrial cancer, which just, there's literally zero evidence to support that claim. People just love fear-mongering about HRT.
One of the myths that I've heard is like people being like, if your child goes to school, like their teachers are going to tell them that they were trans. I was a trans youth. I came out in like 5th grade, and it like, to be fair, I did have a relative who came out as a trans guy, and so I kind of knew what transness was, and I feel like if it wouldn't been for him, I wouldn't have realized it. Anyways, my experience was more so like me going up to my teachers being like, hey, can you please call me like this name and go by this pronouns? They're like, great, cool, gonna teach you algebra now. It wasn't like, yes, like we're trying to brainwash the children. It was like, I don't really gaff, like, cool, I'm here to like teach you about math.
There's also like the extension of that where they're like, they're going to perform a sex change on your child during the school day. It's like, what kind of money do you think the public school system has?
No, and also it's like the age of you, like they think, I'm not even going to say who they, or actually maybe I should, but like the right seems to think that there's being sex change operations being done on children. No, they think the minimum age is 18, but even then, like, the majority of people who get it, it's not at 18.
I would love to hear, like, where that myth originated of that saying of, like, oh, your child's going to go to school and then come back with a sex change operation. Like,
it's definitely because that's scary, you know? Because, like, you can't control what happens to your child at school necessarily, right? They're going to hear things, they're going to meet people, they're going to do things that you can't control, you can't agree to. And naturally, they're going to find community with people you might not support. And so there's just this extension of the fear that your child will become someone you don't want them to be, this kind of repressive, regressive idea that can be hijacked and harnessed by these right-wing kind of spokespeople. We prey off this fear, we get our agenda out.
I also think it comes down to the conflation of social and medical transition. There are certainly going to be cases in which people are out at school and not at home, and the school in many states is not obligated to tell the parents for like very clear safety reasons. And the story of like the school transitioned my child, and when they're talking about like my kid used different pronouns and a different name in a classroom, gets like blown out of proportion into like they did surgery on an 8-year-old.
Speaking about school, that segues perfectly into the next question. When did you first realize you were trans, and what was that moment like?
Genuinely, don't remember. It was a while ago. I know I saw an excellent take a while back, like third hand on the internet, allegedly from some cis guy. So, you know, grain of salt and all that. But that boy and man and girl and woman are all 4 separate genders. And I know at some point I was like, oh, nope, no, thank you. But I don't remember where it was or how it felt. I just remember knowing eventually, you know?
Yeah, I know that I came out when I was like 15, almost 16, but I'm also very aware that I was kind of nebulously out in some places on the internet or like having a lot of thoughts about gender for years before that. The first evidence, the first documented evidence I can find of me writing about being trans is from when I was like 13, 14-ish. But I very deliberately chose to remain closeted for a very long time, despite living in like an ostensibly liberal community. Not even ostensibly, just a genuinely liberal community. I'm from DC. Because this was kind of at the peak of the trans trender, like, attack helicopter, non-binary people don't exist, like online meme culture, and that really deeply affected me. And I was so scared that it was going to translate into real life settings that I kind of waited for 2 or 3 years before starting to come out.
So for me, I feel like my experience is a little different. It was actually interesting hearing your guys' stories about when you came out when you were younger, because I came out when I was 20. And so for me, it was like I was much more conscious. And of course, when I was in high school, I remember like knowing people who had transitioned, but I had never clicked that was something that I could relate to. It was always like, no, I can't, I shouldn't. But I think that also ties into like culture. Like I'm mixed, so I grew up with my mom and dad, and my mom is white and my dad's black. And so growing up in a household and like going to my dad's side of the family, I already felt weird about being mixed. And so I felt like, no, like if I try to experiment with gender, that it'll somehow get even worse. And so I kind of was in the closet for a very long time. And when it actually clicked for me is, I think, sophomore year when I was here at Tufts, because I was in this class in the TPS department, critical drag. And I remember going to like the costume department, and I had tried on a dress because they were making our costumes for us. And I was like, oh, fuck. This is like really nice, guys. And then I think it was like within a couple weeks after that I had made an appointment with Tufts Health Services. And I was just talking with one of the doctors there. And I remember saying how I wanted to go for a more non-binary look. But then, of course, that changed over time once I got to that point. And I was like, oh, I think I'm going to full send it because, yes, I had like started trying out she, her pronouns. And I was like, oh my God, that feels so nice. And part of it is because I'm a German major. And so in German, it is significantly harder to use non-binary pronouns. And I hated using the masculine pronouns. So I remember one day I was like, let me try this. And I switched to the feminine in German, and I was like, oh my God, that feels so much better. And so I switched to doing the same thing in English. And I just, ever since, it was history. I loved it.
Going back to what T had said about how like girl, boy, woman, and man are like 4 separate like genders, I heavily resonate with that because like girlhood and like being a girl, like it was like chill, but it was more so just like womanhood and realizing I can't do feminine things without like being perceived as a woman or just that aspect. I don't know if that makes sense, but just kind of like the disconnect with enjoying things but not wanting to be like associated with womanhood in that regard because I was like, you know, entering puberty and whatnot. I remember having a dream where I woke up as a boy and like everyone had just like known me as a boy, and I remember my name was like Michael, which is now my middle name ironically, and I woke up from that dream and I was kind of like, oh, I think I might be trans, and also thinking about my relative who was a trans guy and, you know, was on T and whatnot. I did have self-doubt because I felt like people would think I was just copying him, which was a part of my journey of just trying to convince people, like, I promise I'm not copying him, like, this is how I feel.
Going back to the myths and things, I know this is one that gets talked about a lot, but this idea that coming out of the thing that you do once, for what it's worth, I am as out as I think anyone can be. I mean, I'm 3/4 of the way to the goddamn blue hair and pronouns meme. And there are still people in my life who I didn't tell. There are people in my life who have since died and never met me. It's just this weird thing where the different versions of you keep spinning on in people's heads. And out is not a binary. It is this weird spectrum that you exist on.
The next question I have is, how has your idea of gender changed since you came out, and or coming out stories?
I think before I came out and like when I was coming out, I was very attached to having specific labels to describe my experience. I think I felt like having really detailed, accurate words was necessary to make people kind of understand what I needed and wanted from them and then like just in life. And as time has gone on, I've kind of strayed away from that. While I do certainly find certain labels and certain language useful to kind of describing how I feel about my gender and how I want people to interact with me, I think on a whole, I'm not as concerned about it. And when I talk to people who are like questioning gender, the thing I try to emphasize is like focus on what actions or like focus on what you want out of transition rather than finding specific words and then trying to figure out how you should transition based off of that. So like if you aren't 100% sure that you're trans, but you know for a fact that you do not, that you like want to start binding or something, like just do that. You don't have to have the language of transness and like 100% security in that to start taking actions, especially when it comes to these like impermanent social actions. Like try something out, see how like the material reality of it feels rather than focusing on like, am I really trans? Am I not?
For me, something that I've like thought more about and realized is just like the idea of like being non-binary and just the other complexities that go into being trans. I think, you know, towards the beginning of my transition, being in the realm of trans identity, it was very much so like your two options are FTM or MTF. And so I've definitely like explored and learned about the nuances in those experiences. And like Ashton said about like binding and stuff, it's like I feel like people tend to think if you bind, boom, you're trans. But it's like you can do things that don't make you trans. Certain actions don't necessarily make you trans. Actions are just actions. However you want.
I think on top of that, like, I feel like we often have this kind of idea of the order in which you take actions in transition, and growing to understand that like you don't have to do everything that's in this like big bucket of what transition is quote unquote supposed to be, or you don't have to do them in the order that is like normatively like prescribed. I had top surgery like almost a year before I started testosterone because I was way more certain that I wanted surgery than that I wanted to start hormones. I changed my name legally way after I did other stuff. I ended up not changing my gender marker just for like partially safety reasons, partially just a lot of reasons. I think focusing on what you want to do with your body and what you need rather than focusing on like the script of transness.
Yeah, I resonate heavily with there's no rigid rules of gender. That's something that I wish that I had known earlier on in coming out. When I came out and I started estrogen and testosterone blockers, I swung heavily in the opposite direction of femininity, where I was like, oh, my favorite color is now pink and shades of purple. I love pastel. Like, I have to wear these certain outfits. And of course, thankfully, that has changed over time because, yes, you do not have to wear certain things. Gender is not tied closely with the clothes that you wear. Gender is how you portray yourself and how you feel. And now I feel so much more comfortable, although I think getting tattoos helped, but yeah. So the next question I have is, what's something about being trans that you wish more people understood?
Gender dysphoria, yes, it is a mental like illness or condition, like according to the DSM-5 or whatever the technical terminology is, but it's a thing that is treatable. I think a lot of people, specifically like people on the right, just have the generalization that trans people are mentally ill and it's like something that needs to be cured. But I just find fault in that logic. When you're trans, like treatment can range for, you know, each individual person, you know, whether that's hormones or surgeries or social transition or clothes and whatnot. So I think just like, I wish people more so understood that it's not like this scary like mental disorder. It's just like I don't even know the right word, but it's something that, or not even being trans, gender dysphoria, sorry, is the thing that can be treated. And then also like trans people like aren't miserable. Like we have fun and like we're normal people. Like again, going back to all the propaganda, it's like we don't wake up every morning being like, oh, I hate my body and I hate life. Like no, like yes, dysphoria can be bad on some days, but we are normal people and we go to classes and we have jobs and we have friends and whatnot. And then third, I wish more people understood the role of autism and transness. I have some friends who have autism who are also trans, and they've talked to me about how they view gender roles and their own gender. and I wish people just talked about it more.
I think sometimes people like pretend that trans people just have this overly restrictive view of gender norms and gender roles, and that like the idea of transness is that if you don't strictly abide by binary gender norms, then like you automatically think that like something is wrong with you. I think the whole idea of like, why can't you just be a feminine man, or why can't you just be like a masculine woman, kind of misses the point. I find the idea that trans people have a regressive or an overly restrictive view of how men and women are supposed to be act kind of laughable. It is an expansive view of like gender beyond like biological sex.
Yeah, in what I like to call the TikTokification of being trans, there's something that I really wish had not become a popular train of thought, and it's that all trans people want to have gender-affirming surgery.
Yes.
And I hate that so much. Not wanting to have surgery does not negate your transness. So the next question I have is, what does visibility mean to you? Do you love it, hate it, or feel indifferent? And is it always a good thing, or does it come with its downsides? And I will say visibility for me is just the sense of being unequivocal, like being yourself in all the forms that you come in.
Yeah, I mean, visibility, the act of being visible, I think it's something I have developed an increasingly complicated relationship with. Obviously, visibility is extremely important. Representation is important for allowing people to, especially young people or people who are beginning to question their gender, to see themselves and see a future for themselves. I know that was immensely important to me when I was younger. People who have another trans person in their lives are more likely to identify their transness sooner, and also like are going to have a community when they start that out, which is going to be helpful. That said, visibility without adequate protections can feel like a target on your back. To be visible, especially to be hyper visible, is to be under a level of scrutiny that can be extremely dangerous and extremely scary to live with. I go back and forth between thinking of visibility as kind of a necessary evil or thinking that it's a primarily positive thing with some downsides. And I don't know when I'm going to come to my conclusion on that one. Regardless, I will continue to think it's important, but that it should not be treated as the single most important thing when it comes to trans advocacy.
I'm always with Ash on the fact that it's complicated. Growing up, I didn't see anyone like me. I've still seen very few. And on the one hand, that's a very difficult thing to live with. And on the other, every time someone knows to look for us, that's another person who's judging us, who's debating, what to do about us.
And I'll say, for me, another downside of visibility on a much more personal scale is when I am feeling dysphoric, the last thing I want to be is visibly trans. I absolutely hate it. Those are the days where I don't even want to look in a mirror. I'll do my makeup and something will just feel fundamentally wrong. I'll have made a mistake and then redoing it again and again doesn't help. And those are usually the days when I'm okay, I have to go back to sleep. Today is not the day for me, not the day to be trans. And it just sucks sometimes because I don't think I have found a good method for getting over it yet, other than just giving it time.
Yeah, I think this isn't necessarily directly related to the question, but something I've always kind of found interesting is people often assume that the kind of objective of transition is assimilation, and in a sense that assimilation is a level of invisibility within broader cisgender society. But that's obviously not the intention of a lot of people who are transitioning. But I also think there's just interesting things about the way that transition itself produces visibility and produces kind of a differentiation from cisgendered bodies. I always think about these visible signals of transness that are products of particularly medical transition, be that top surgery scars and other things, and how that is both a point of affirmation and also for many people a point of fear and some level of internal contention.
I am very lucky to be able to pass well as a guy in society, especially now. Just safety wise, I'm very happy that I don't have to worry about someone necessarily clocking me as trans. But then there's also the part of me that's I wish I could communicate with other trans people that I'm trans if they don't know me. I don't know if that makes sense, but just feeling lucky enough to pass and feel gender euphoric about how I present myself, but also wanting to have that unspoken relationship with other trans people without necessarily having to verbalize it.
Okay, and moving on to the next question, which is kind of related to the last one, is how does it feel to be trans?
I don't know how much this analogy will land for everyone, but one of the things I do when I'm not here is dive. And honestly, being trans oftentimes feels sort of similar to that. In that a lot of the time when I'm in the water, I feel free and like I can fly. And the world feels like this beautiful, endless ocean that you can move through with barely a thought. And it is wonderful and free. And sometimes something goes wrong and you run low on, I have stories about this, you run low on air or something gets messed up and it feels like you are drowning and going to die. And that feeling is indescribably terrifying and horrible. And yet, in much the same way that I wouldn't trade being trans for anything, I would not stop diving. Even if one of these days I drown on the bottom of the ocean, it's worth it.
I think I don't usually think about being trans until it is brought up, but it also is brought up quite a bit. I think particularly in social contexts, being trans feels like, or consists of this kind of weird dissonance or negotiation of my self-perception and my knowledge or perception of how other people are perceiving me. I feel like I am in a very frequent state of trying to figure out what other people are seeing when they look at me, particularly the kind of further I've gotten in medically transitioning. And it's a very isolating experience. It's a very isolating experience, but it also, how I felt before that made me feel kind of incapable of connection, whereas now I think there are often more material barriers to connection with other people. But when I am able to find community, I feel more present in it, if that makes sense.
I'm interested by this thing that you've said about not feeling trans until it's in the context of other people. Because to be honest, sometimes I feel trans most when I am looking at other things, as though it's not my being trans isn't a thing that exists between other people's perceptions of me and me, but as a filter through which I see the world. I think in much the same way, you can look at the world through so many different lenses. Transness often feels like one.
I agree with that. And I also agree with what Ashton said about like the isolation of it. It's like, I don't always think about being trans like if I'm just like in classes, but like sometimes like going clothes shopping or looking at men's pants or going to the doctor especially, it's just like kind of realizing like, oh, like viewing it through a trans lens. And then for me at least, like sometimes I'll just like see like a group of just like guys who I'll assume are all cis, just like kind of hanging out, maybe playing poker with each other, and I just kind of have this feeling like I'll never like have that sort of camaraderie or that just like innate cis man experience, which isn't to say that I don't have friendships with cis guys. I do, and you know, cis girls and people of all gender identities, but also just like the wow, like it seems to come so easy to them, to cis guys, like just yeah.
I think sometimes there's this assumption that like once you pass, you're done and you've achieved it and everything kind of is like smooth and easy from there out. And while obviously things can be smoother and easier, it doesn't necessarily, or it doesn't kind of negate your previous experiences and your previous kind of knowledge of how to engage with society. And that can cause these kind of weird tensions of like, how am I supposed to act in this situation in the correct gendered way, or in the gendered way that is expected of me?
So the next question I have is, what is something you like that is not related to being trans?
I love doing puzzles. In Tish, they have those puzzles all around, and I will admit, on multiple occasions, I have procrastinated on my homework just by doing puzzles. I love Legos too, just it's the tactile and building aspect of it. I also love animals. I love dogs. We have 4 dogs at my house. Very excited to see them over break. Yeah.
Oh, the feeling of walking down a street, like down the center of a street in the middle of the night. It feels very similar to being trans now that I think about it.
Yeah, so for me, I really, really like rhythm games. I have Project Sakai on my phone and I play it all the time. And there's something about being hyper-focused and looking at the tiles on a screen. And when I go to arcades, you know that giant piano tiles game? I will play that until I have all 10 of the top scores. Like, I love rhythm games so much. I also really like fashion. Like, I've gotten into the goth aesthetic lately. It's been like a year and a half. And I just love everything about it. I love that you can do so many things with the color black. Because I used to think it was boring, like black jeans, black t-shirt. But being goth is so much more than black jeans, black t-shirt. And just the color combos that you can do with it, like pairing it with dark green or pairing it with red. I really love that. It's really fun.
Gonna be so real. All of my interests feel very trans. But that's fine also. I don't limit my interests through my transness, but I'm very interested in drag and I'm very interested in queer studies in media, and that is very trans. Yeah.
Okay, so as we're starting to wrap up, I have 1 or 2 more questions for you guys. This next one is, do you have any favorite slang terms for genitals that you like to use? I can start off. This is one that I heard recently when I was talking with somebody else who is trans. And so he's a trans guy, and he said that one of his favorites that he's heard is man cave. And there's just something about man cave that, like, that is the best thing I've ever heard. I also really like princess wands, and I like joystick for trans femmes like me.
To joystick, I will add touchpad.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what the first one that came to mind was blit for boy clit. I was talking with one of my friends who's also a trans guy, and we were talking about someone that happens to be trans, and he mentioned it. Long story, but he said the word blit, and I just started laughing so hard. I was like, that is the funniest, like, term.
That reminds me a lot of gawk, which is girl cock, and I actually hate that one. I don't know. There's just something about it that I hate. Another one I've heard is original factory equipment.
These aren't super related, and they're not necessarily genital focused, but I know someone who makes a joke. They're called broad shoulders because they're for women, which I think is really funny. I also, this is, again, not a term for genitals, but there's a article from like a queer studies journal called Leatherdyke Boys and Their Daddies, How to Have Sex Without Women or Men. And I think it is like one of the most phenomenal, one of my favorite at least, pieces of academic text about like bodily resignification, especially in the context of like sex and transness. I also, this is potentially problematic of me, but I do enjoy when a cis person is like genuinely trying and just says something insane when describing your body. I think that shit is so funny. I think it's so funny. Like, yeah, have a respectful conversation with your partners about what terminology they like to use, but it will also never not make me laugh for someone to just make a wild but like sincere and well-meaning assumption.
This is one I don't necessarily like. It's just one that I was chatting with said, but groat for girl scrotum.
Do you remember Goth State?
Was this the same person?
Yeah, so the next and last question we have is, what fictional character would you die on the hill of being trans?
I think Yoshi is non-binary. Yoshi just exudes gender.
I would like to raise you Birdo.
Oh. That's a good one.
Birdo is my answer, I believe.
I would argue that Love Lies Bleeding is like a very transmasculine film. It is a lesbian film, and it is also very much a transmasculine film.
Awesome. So that is all we have for you today. We hope this episode gave you something to think about, laugh about, or relate to. Visibility is complicated, but at the end of the day, just existing as your authentic selves is powerful. Before we go, we want to shout out some of our favorite trans media, whether it's books, shows, movies, or creators that really get it right. I will invite you all to share your favorite. Yeah, so for me, I would say Violet Pony, Tape Girl, and Femtanyl, Femtanyl. I love those artists, but it is very like hyper pop-y.
We Both Laughed in Pleasure is a series of selected diary entries from Lou Sullivan, who was one of, if not the first openly gay trans man to medically transition. Very, very, very good. I also am a big fan of the second special episode of Euphoria, Fuck Anyone Who's Not a C-Blob. It was, I think, directed and like potentially co-written by Hunter Schafer. It's so good. Even if you don't watch Euphoria, frankly, I think it is just like such a cool piece of trans media.
For me, the character Barney in the animated series Dead End Paranormal Park. It's on Netflix. Also, the singer Sasha Allen. He's also on TikTok. And lastly, Alex Kansani. She's a model, but she's also really funny. And she's a hoot. She's a hoot and a holler.
I'm personally a big fan of Susan Stryker, who's kind of one of the founders of trans feminist studies. There's a quote from her that's been living rent-free in my head for the past, month, which goes, "If this is your path as it is mine, let me offer whatever solace you may find in this monstrous benediction. May you discover the enlivening power of darkness within yourself. May it nourish your rage. May your rage inform your actions, and your actions transform you as you struggle to transform your world."
Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time on Sexy Sips. Stay safe, stay sexy, and stay you.